I'd asked Kristen to dinner for that night, but she begged off. Dinner with her folks. She promised to call me the next day sometime, and I told her I'd be there. So my first Saturday night alone consisted of puppy chow for Sun Tzu and a bowl of soup for me. 5 episodes into the Band of Brothers box set, I put the pup in his crate, went back to the couch, and went asleep. One of the worst parts about growing old is my inability to sleep much more than 6 hours a night. As a teenager, most of my weekend was spent in bed until almost 11. At West Point, of course, that changed dramatically. I was up by 4:30 every morning. That's really early for those of you not acquainted with military time. The rest of my time in the Army was similarly spent in snatches of sleep. After the Army, though, I enjoyed sleeping until at least 8 or 9 most weekend mornings, and managed at least 8 hours of sleep nearly every night. Now, though, when I most needed to sleep my time away to avoid the unbearable emptiness of the house, you think I could sleep now? Not a chance. So there I was at 5:30, walking a clearly irritated puppy around the block for the 4th time. A few hundred yards into the 5th trip around, a tall, elderly man in pajamas and a bathrobe was waiting for me from his front porch. "You shouldn't do that," he called. I stopped and turned to him. "Do what?" He nodded down at the wheezing puppy. "Walk him so much. Or so fast, either. He's a pug. And you know this how?" He smiled a patient smile. "Because it's what I do. I'm a vet." I looked down at Sun Tzu, then back to the man on the porch. Scooping the dog into my arms, I walked to the front porch. "Sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to be snotty or anything." He looked at me for a moment, then to the dog now snuggled into my chest. "Alan LaCroix," he said, reaching over to pet the puppy. He was about 70, tall and gaunt, bald with a gray, close-cropped monk's ring of hair and reading glasses. His forearms, though, belied his age. They looked like bands of steel. "Luke Patterson," I responded. "Pugs have a shortened, soft palate," he explained, looking at me as he spoke, "so they're just not good at breathing. It's why they snore so loud and wheeze and pant so much, especially in hotter weather. They get winded and overheated real easy, so you need to keep an eye on him in this weather. Make sure he gets plenty of water when you get him home. And you may want to check out the pads of his paws. They're probably swollen pretty bad. Ice them." "But I only walked him 4 times around the block today," he said. "I know. I counted. And you walked him for nearly an hour yesterday. Probably 2.5, maybe 3 miles you walked him. I saw that too, while I read my papers near the front window. You'll kill him, son. Sure as shit. You keep it up and you'll kill him." I nodded, terrified of what I'd nearly done. "I didn't know." He smiled. "Most first-time pet owners don't have a clue. Someone should have told you, but they didn't. So now I'm telling you." He scratched Sun Tzu behind the ears. "Water. First thing when you get him home, and you'd best carry him there. See how he's already panting so's he can't quit." But he was also looking up at me with adoring eyes and to my eternal shame, love, and happiness and trust. "Promise," I said. "Okay, Luke Patterson, just thought you should know." "How'd you know I'm a first-time pet owner?" He chuckled. "Because you're letting the dog walk you instead of the other way around. Next time you walk him, keep him cinched in tight to your side. If he tries pulling ahead, jerk him back. You've got a harness collar here, so you won't be hurting him none. You'll just be showing him who's the boss." He chuckled again, then waved and went back into his house. I walked back home, got Sonny a big bowl of fresh, cold water, and put him down. He drank nearly half the bowl in no time, and his panting started to subside. "Sorry, boy," I said, petting him when he was done. He wagged his tail, then went to the living room and curled up in the middle of the floor. I, on the other hand, spent the next hour getting over the shakes that had overcome me. Christ, how would I have explained to Kyle why Sonny was dead? As if enough shit wasn't going wrong in his life, he came inches from having me kill his dog. Jesus Christ. By 9, I decided to go grocery shopping. Do you have any idea how bored you have to be before grocery shopping actually becomes the highlight of your day? I was in the produce aisle when I heard the familiar voice behind me. "You," Heather Farley said, reaching in and smacking the zucchini from my hands. "Don't buy that, Professor. It's gross." I looked at her and laughed. "Good morning, Miss Farley." She gave a bright smile, as did the shorter brunette next to her. "Morning, Professor Patterson," she intoned in mock schoolgirl. "Okay, fine. We're not in class. Call me Luke." "And you'll call me Heather," she said. "And me Brandy?" the other girl asked. "Fair enough." I turned back to the zucchini. "So what's so gross about zucchini?" "Not zucchini," Heather said. "Just that zucchini." "Okay, I'll bite. What's so wrong with that zucchini?" She looked at me like I was hopeless. It's crappy and grown with pesticides and insecticides and picked before it's ripe and ripened with gases and transported from God knows where and it's God knows how old. Get the picture? Okay, and my alternative is? Dude, Brandy chimed in, look around yourself. You're in the breadbasket of the Midwest. You drive down any road, and within 5 miles you'll find farm stands all over the place. It'll be better and fresher, and taste better, and be better for you. I looked from Brandy to Heather and back again. These girls seemed like clones with a passion for long, run-on sentences. And fruit? Melons are in season, Heather said, then flashed me a look that seemed to invite me to take a quick peek at her melons. Same farm stands? Usually. And meat? Heather looked at Brandy, and they nodded almost in unison. Sure, you can buy your meat here. Not your bread, though. There's this bakery on Winstead Street. You know the one? I nodded. Just went there yesterday for the first time. They nodded knowingly. That's your best bet. Come on, Heather said. Follow us. We'll help. I'm pretty sure I can take it from here, I protested. Yeah, right? Brandy snorted. She rolled her eyes at Heather, who rolled her eyes back in response. So I spent the next half hour being guided around the grocery store buying almost nothing except milk, coffee, pasta, meat, and frozen vegetables, though only if those vegetables were out of season. And strangely, it was fun. Heather and Brandy were a pair of chatterboxes, talking almost non-stop about classes, professors, boys, and the like. Once through the checkout lane and into the parking lot, Heather turned to me. So you want to follow us to some farm stands? I smiled. No thanks. I'm pretty sure I can take it from here. And this time I mean it. Heather batted her eyes at me. What's wrong, Professor? Afraid of being left alone with the two of us for too long? Yeah, Professor, Brandy joined in, putting an arm around Heather's waist and pulling her hip in close. Don't think you can handle it? I felt the blood rush to my head, both in embarrassment and in sudden excitement. I tried to stammer, and they both started giggling. Okay then, Heather said, flashing a grin that offered promises of things I'd only heard about. But if you change your mind, you've got my email. I barely managed to wave. An hour later, now fully loaded up with fresh bread and croissants and some vegetables from a farm stand 2 miles out of town, I was back in my kitchen unloading my morning's haul. There were no messages, and I was more than a bit disappointed. The phone finally rang, though, when I finished putting the groceries away. I was wondering when you would call, I answered. There was silence, then Whitney spoke. Oh, you were, expecting someone? I deflated. Yeah, sorta. What's up, Whit? I was wondering if I could bring Kyle back today instead of tomorrow like we planned. Something wrong? She hesitated, then answered. Well, he's pretty bored. And he misses his puppy too. And, well, I've got a pretty big trial starting on Tuesday, and I'm thinking of getting an early start on final trial prep. I thought about it for a moment, wondering if this would screw up any potential plans Kristen may offer. Luke, sorry, I said. When were you thinking of bringing him back? Now, I looked up. It wasn't even 11 yet. Sure, that's fine. Whenever. I'll be here. Thanks, Luke, she said. Then, after a slight pause, she added, I hope I'm not messing up something for you. I'll deal with it, I said. Sorry. See you soon. I hung up. No goodbye, no I love you. Just hung up. Kristen called just after Whitney dropped Kyle off. He was in the backyard, playing with Sonny, when the phone rang. Hello. Morning, Luke, Kristen said. Good morning to you. So do you have any plans for today? I sighed. Whitney just brought Kyle back. A day early. She laughed. Welcome to it. Might as well get used to it now. This happens to you a lot? No, she said. Not a lot. Sometimes, though. And sometimes it goes the other way. Sometimes I use Tyler as a babysitter if I have a hot date or something. I pondered this, wondering how often she had hot dates. You there? She asked. Yeah, still here. Well, do you still want to get out of the house today? You got something in mind? I do, actually, she said. Think you can handle being around my ex-husband and his new wife? Say again? She laughed. Tyler's invited me out to his house for a cookout. A Labor Day party. I mentioned I might be bringing a date, and he said fine. Yeah, I said, but Kyle is welcome to come along. Ben will be there along with at least a dozen other kids, and Tyler's got a pool they can play in. And you won't be uncomfortable? No, she answered. This doesn't happen often, but it happens often enough that everyone's pretty comfortable with the situation. I mean, we're not all best buds or anything, but we get along and put up that front for Ben. And we still have a ton of mutual friends, so it's not really all that uncomfortable anymore. I looked out at Kyle, realized Sunny was already tiring and needed a nap, and figured I had nothing better on my platter. Okay, that, and I wanted to see Kristen in a swimsuit. So do I bring swim trunks? She laughed. If you want to swim. You bringing a swimsuit? I guess you'll just have to come along and find out, won't you? An hour later, swim trunks and towels for Kyle and I in a duffel bag. We picked up Kristen in front of a small, neat house with perfectly maintained landscaping and a flawless lawn. She opened the door before I could ring the doorbell. Come in for a sec, she said. You can help me carry the beans and some stuff? Was I supposed to bring something? I asked, following her through a neat and homey living room into a tiny, galley-style kitchen. She was dressed in shorts and a sleeveless, button-up blouse, and I appreciated the view of her smooth, toned legs. Not really, she said, unplugging a crock pot on the counter and nodding for me to take it. If you want, we'll stop on the way out and you can get a case of beer or pop or something. Fair enough, I agreed. She scooped up a duffel bag of her own and her purse and turned. Sorry, but there's no time for a tour now. Maybe next time? Sure, looking around one last time before following her out. It's nice though. Yeah, she agreed. Cozy, and not too much. Who does your landscaping? I asked as she opened the back door to my car, and she and Kyle exchanged greetings. No one, she said, putting her things down on the back seat before taking the crock pot from my hands and putting it on the floor before turning to me. I do it all myself. Keeps me busy when Ben's with his dad. It's real nice, I said, opening her door. Thanks, she said with a bright smile, sliding into the seat and buckling her seatbelt. An hour later, I'd met most of the 20 or so adults at the party. Tyler Collins and his wife Marissa Shee was an up-and-coming science fiction author. I was told were pleasant and easy to talk with. Their home was pretty, but not too large or in any way ostentatious, and it sat well off the road on a 5-acre parcel surrounded by 100-year-old oak trees. And you were in the Army? Tyler said. I nodded. Got out in '92. What did you do? Marissa asked. She was pretty in a tall, gangly sort of way, and her smile was easy, but sly and half-hidden. Also, she didn't seem to speak much, but when she did it was direct and to the point. Infantry, I said. Platoon leader. She nodded, and Kristen spoke up. Kyle told the class he's some kind of war hero. Tyler raised an eyebrow at that. War hero? Forgot to duck, I answered. That Kuwait and Iraq thing? Desert Storm? That's the one, I confirmed. Gulf War. Did you see battle? Marissa asked. I hesitated, then nodded. And you did something heroic? No more than I was supposed to do. Marissa's sly smile returned, and she fixed me with a stare. Are we going to have to torture you to get the story out of you? I felt their stares and knew they wanted me to tell them some John Wayne tale of valor and honor and all that other bullshit. But I knew they wouldn't understand. None of them had been there, and you had to have been there. Marissa sensed my hesitation, though, and let me off the hook. You could learn something, Tyler, she said, still looking at me. And what's that, dear? Mystery is a good thing. But I write mysteries. I mean in a person, she said. Sometimes it's best to keep certain things to yourself. He laughed. And I'm what? An open book? I watched them, worried about a potential flare-up. But her sly smile was now turned on him, and coupled with a softness in her eyes that showed she loved him just the way he was. And his confidence in receiving that look in knowing her devotion to him was also visible in his easy stroking of her arm. Not in you, Tyler. In your characters. Hold some things back. Let the readers wonder what the secrets are, and don't spill them all at the end. He nodded at this, looking from Marissa to Kristen to me. Then his grin nearly split his face. My harshest critic. So, Kristen said in the lull. Anyone going into the pool? Are you? Marissa asked me. When I hesitated, Kristen flashed me a devilish grin. I'm only going in if you're going in. I looked at Tyler and Marissa, both of whom had lopsided grins on their faces, then back to Kristen. I really did want to see her in that swimsuit, I decided. And assuming we were going to become at least friends, I was only putting off the inevitable. Where do I change? I asked. Follow me, Kristen replied, taking my hand and smiling. If you're not out in 5 minutes, Tyler said, grinning and raising his eyebrows. He wishes, Kristen snorted back at Tyler. He can use Ben's room. I'll use the hallway bathroom. Spoil sport, Marissa chided. 5 minutes later, towel wrapped around my waist, I walked back to the rear lawn of the house. You have the whitest legs I've ever seen, Kristen said. Like a ghost. someone next to Tyler said. Why the towel? Marissa asked. You wearing Speedos or something? I looked from her to Kristen to the others, then took the towel away from my waist. They tried not to gasp or look shocked, but none of them managed to totally control their surprise. Like I said, I explained, looking down at the jagged lines of scar tissue, rising above the suit from my right hip and going down nearly to the knee of my right leg. I forgot to duck. Kristen drew near and reached out, her fingertips tracing the angry, knotted lines of scarring above my waistband. I'd rather you didn't do that just now, I said softly. Something's liable to pop up in a most embarrassing manner. The tension broke, and everyone laughed. Then Tyler offered to let us go back in and take some more time changing if that was going to be the case, while others just suggested a corner of the pool away from the children. And though Kristen seemed to take it all in stride, I was beginning to blush. Oh look, Tyler laughed. Looks like someone's got a crush on someone. Tyler, Marissa warned, shooting him a glance. Sorry, he said, still chuckling. Go on, you two. Keep an eye on the kids for a while, and we'll start grilling. Sure you don't want some help? I asked. He shook his head. Positive. Just go have some fun. After a half hour in the pool, mostly spent avoiding getting splashed, dunked, or otherwise jumped on by a dozen kids of all ages, Karen and I were sitting on the concrete slab with our feet dangling in the water. Does it hurt? She asked, her eyes on the kids. No. The warm water makes it feel pretty good, actually. Is that why Kyle says you're a war hero? No, I said, turning to look at her. Granted, it was only a one-piece suit, but she did a nice job of filling it out. His mom told him that. The first time he saw the scars, he wanted to know what it was. That's what she told him. Does he know what it's from? He knows as much as you. Does anyone else? I mean, besides Whitney, of course, and probably your folks and whoever was there when it happened. No, you've about covered it. Except I never told my folks. Understanding now how quiet I kept the matter, she was tentative with her next questions. So are you? Am I what? A hero? Tough to define, don't you think? She turned and fixed me with a stare. Did the army define it that way? I stared back, then nodded. Yeah, I got my medal for it. Medals, if you count the Purple Heart. Which one did you get? Silver Star. Is that a biggie? I shrugged. Sure. Third highest one they give out. She gave me a smile and a raised eyebrow. What? So I guess you really are a hero then, huh? I chuckled. No. Like I said, just too damn stupid to get the hell down. I watched her face move closer, and I froze, my eyes getting wide. She kissed me. Not a smoldering kiss. Not really even a romantic kiss. Just a light brushing of her lips against mine. Whatever you call it, though, it was electric, and it was over before I could kiss her back. Then reality hit, and I looked around. No one else had seen it, including Kyle. Don't worry, she whispered. He wasn't looking. I smiled, glad she understood and didn't mistake my reaction for rejection. Always wanted to kiss a hero, Luke Patterson, she said. I felt the giddiness in my belly, a lightness that hadn't been there in a long time. That all you ever wanted to try with a hero? The words were out of my mouth before I could check them. Her grin got downright flirtatious at that. Maybe if it's the right hero. You know, not just any old hero. So there are a lot of those around here to pick from? Heroes, that is? She laughed. Good point. By 6:30, I was beginning to worry about little Sun Tzu. Sure, he'd sleep 20 hours a day when Kyle wasn't around, but he still needed to eat. Add to that a belly full of chicken, coleslaw, beans, and potato salad. And I was also ready to just crash and relax. But Dad, Kyle protested, Ben wants me to spend the night. I looked at Kristen, who shrugged. Just then, Marissa came over. Sorry, she said. Ben asked a couple of hours ago. And it's okay with us if it's okay with you. I looked from her to Kyle, then to little Ben standing impatiently and expectantly 10 feet back, then back to Marissa. Okay, I didn't know them from Adam, but how dangerous can two authors really be? You're sure it's not a problem? She smiled. Really? Ben wants him to stay, and we've got plenty of room. What time should I pick him up tomorrow? I asked, at which time Kyle gave a whoop of joy and Ben pumped his fist. Kristen chuckled, and Marissa grinned. We'll drop him off at your place. Probably at about noon. Thanks, I said, which she waved off before giving me a hug and thanking me for coming. I took 5 minutes to lecture Kyle on manners, being on his best behavior, and all the other crap my parents always lectured me about when staying at someone's house for the first time. He spent those 5 minutes rolling his eyes and waiting for me to finish so he could get back in the pool. Most of the drive back to town was spent in a comfortable silence. It became a lot more comfortable when Kristen grabbed my free hand and put it on top of her thigh down near the knee. I shot her a look, but she was just staring straight ahead with a smile playing at her lips. "So you want to get a drink somewhere before you drop me off?" she asked. "Sounds nice," I replied. "Can I drop by the house and feed Sonny first? And let him out of his cage for a few minutes?" "Sure." 5 minutes later, Sonny was out of the cage and scampering around the backyard, sniffing every blade of grass before lifting his leg and claiming it as his domain. "Got a beer?" Kristen asked from beside me on the deck. "Sure," I said, going to the fridge and grabbing a couple of bottles of Amstel Light, popping the caps and returning. "One ice-cold beer for the lovely lady." She took a long pull from the beer. "Something wrong?" I asked, just getting my courage up. "For what?" She took another long pull from the beer, then gave a tiny burp and giggled. "Sorry." I snickered, then took a long pull from my own beer. "You need some courage too?" she asked. "I don't know yet. I just figured if you needed some, then maybe I'd better get some, too." "Oh, really? Really? Then let's see if either of us needed the liquid courage," she said, putting her beer bottle on the railing. She turned to face me, then shot a look at my beer bottle. "Does this mean that?" I said, my eyes on her while I put my beer bottle down. She nodded, then stepped close, leaned in, and kissed me. No slight brushing of the lips this time. Oh no, this was the real thing. Gentle kiss with light pressure, moving to a little more pressure, and a slight parting of the lips. Her hands were softly running through my hair, and I put my arms around her, hands on her back, and enjoyed the moment. Then, after maybe a minute, she broke the kiss and looked at me. "Thanks. I think that should be the other way around," I murmured. "It was nice. It was amazing." She smiled, a happy smile, not the lascivious one. That told me she'd gone as far as she intended to for the time being. "So did I pass the test?" I asked. She searched my face to see if there was any hidden meaning in my words, which there wasn't, then gave me a peck on the cheek. "It's not an audition. It's something I've wanted to do since last week." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I didn't know if I liked you enough. Remember what I said?" I nodded. "We've got children now. No sense in rushing into something that may only hurt them." She nodded, relieved at my understanding. "So I'm sorry if you want more now, but I just can't take that chance. Sleeping together too soon just complicates things. Makes people, I don't know, it just changes things. It makes them possessive," I said. "And too appreciative too early, I guess." Meaning if we slept together too soon, then you definitely become the rebound, which is not something either of us wants. She thought about that and her lips narrowed, her eyes staring off to the side. "Did I say something wrong?" She turned to me and smiled. "No, Luke, not a damn thing." The smile looked forced, though, and I took a stab at her sudden anxiety. "You know," I whispered, "just being the first one after my divorce doesn't mean you'll ever be a rebound. If we play this right and assuming we don't hate each other in a few months, there's no reason we can't become best friends before we become more. And if that's in the cards, then so be it. If it's not, though, it'll have nothing to do with you being rebound or anything." Her eyes sparkled with teardrops, but her smile told me I'd said just the right thing. "Goddamn, you're smart. No wonder you're a professor." And she leaned in and kissed me again. Only this one lasted longer than the first one. This one only ended when Sun Tzu decided to announce his presence by yelping and hoofing and bouncing up and down at our feet. "Ouch," I said, breaking the kiss. "What? Little shit just nipped my ankle." She laughed, then picked up her beer and took a sip. "Let's get him fed and go have that drink." "Good plan," I agreed. At 11:30 the next morning, Kyle bounded through the front door and made a beeline straight for Sonny, who was equally elated to see his big brother and best bud. They romped together out to the backyard. "Hello. I heard someone call." I walked from the kitchen to the living room and saw Tyler Collins standing in the doorway. "Just wanted to make sure someone was home," he said. "Come on in. Have a beer or a pop or something." He smiled, shrugged, and stepped in, closing the door behind himself. "Did he behave?" I asked. "Sure," he said. "They had a blast. He may need a nap, though. Sorry, but they didn't fall asleep on the couch until almost midnight." I chuckled. The joys of sleepovers. "Name your poison," I said, opening the refrigerator so he could see inside. "Just a Diet Pepsi, please." I pulled out two and handed one to him. He popped it, took a drink, then placed it on the counter, leaning easily against the countertop as he did so. "So what's it like being a best-selling author?" I asked for one of anything else to say. Busier than you'd think. There's the writing, then the editing, then more editing. That's after I come up with the story idea and research it all first, of course. And while all that's going on, there's consultations on the movie scripts if it sells, book tours, talk shows, and the rest of the crap that goes into selling the book. Sounds pretty hectic. Way more hectic than I'd have ever guessed, he confirmed. He took another sip, then said, "And you? The life of a history professor? 9 hours a week in class, maybe 18 hours a week on average preparing for classes and grading exams and term papers. Another 9 hours a week of office hours to meet one-on-one with the students, and faculty meetings a couple of hours a week. That's not so bad," he observed. Then, I added, "There's the inevitable research and writing we do on our own, usually with research and editing help from student interns. You know, stuff for historic journals and the occasional small press book. And that's how much more time a week? Maybe 15 hours. Okay," he said, holding up his hands. It now officially reached the borderline of hectic and too much. I shrugged. It's not so bad. I can do a lot of the work from home, class preparation and writing and stuff. And it doesn't really matter what time I do it here, especially now that. He looked at me, heard my words, and saw the look on my face. He finished my sentence in his head, then said, "Yeah, that's how I got started writing." I mulled over in my head how to ask the next question, but he saw the look on my face and grinned. "So you and Kristen are friends, for now, at least?" "Good idea," he said. When I went through it, when Kristen left me, I was just, lost, or worse. "So you would recommend? Take it slow, get to know each other, talk, a lot. Talk about what you each want out of life and what you like and don't like and all the little shit that can suddenly become a big deal, Sure." I took a sip, again unsure how to proceed. Tyler's face was an open book, though, so I just decided to say it. "She told me what happened with you too." He nodded. "Pretty bad. But she says she's changed now, that she'd never do it again." His eyes narrowed, and he looked at me long and hard before speaking. "Did she say why? That she couldn't put Ben through anything like that again?" He nodded. "Explains a lot." "Like what?" "Like her lifestyle since Randy divorced her." He finished his pop, put the empty upside down in the sink, then crossed his arms in front of his chest. "She was a selfish little bitch, Luke. Sorry, but it's the truth. But since her second divorce, she hardly dates. I mean, hell, this town's big, but it isn't that big. And Ben tells us almost any time she has a date. We're not prying, But we're usually the babysitters when she does, so we have a pretty good idea. And we all still hang around pretty much the same places, so we know if she was with a string of boyfriends. But she hasn't been. Like a nun almost. Like she's terrified or something. And you thought?" He smiled. "I'd like to say I thought it was Kristen pining away from me, her lost love. But that's bullshit, of course. That would have stopped the second Marissa and I got married. Then we thought she just didn't want to be thought of as a tramp, and now." He shrugged. "Her reason makes sense. A lot of sense, actually, and..." He patted me on the shoulder. "And I think it means she's not the selfish little bitch she was back then. I think it means she may have just finally gotten her priorities in order, and she's not putting herself at the top of that list." I couldn't look at him when I asked the next question, both from embarrassment and from fear at the answer. "You know if she's seeing anyone else?" "I'm positive she's not. Ben told me all about her and Allison taking you out to get the dog. He said that was the first time she's ever even talked about another man or seemed happy about meeting one in ages. Maybe almost a year. And he notices those things. He's pretty protective, I guess. I'm pretty sure he wonders why she's not with someone again like I am." I nodded, contemplating his words and taking all of this in. "Still," he continued, "you gotta wonder." "About what?" He raised an eyebrow. "She's known you what? A few weeks?" I nodded. "And you two left together last night, right?" "Right. And you spent the night together, right?" I gave a sad shake of the head. 2 kisses. Good kisses. Hell, great kisses. Still, just 2 kisses, a beer here, 2 beers at the bar and grill, and home to our respective beds by 10. He put on a look of mock astonishment. "Not even a HJ, just a few kisses?" I laughed. "Tell me about it." He was still laughing when he left a few moments later. Having Kyle back after only 3 days apart reminded me how much busier I was around the house when he wasn't with Whitney. And it reminded me how much happier, and not so alone, I was too. Also, it was fun spending the afternoon making Russian tanks and soldiers in the basement and painting the cool tin castings. It's easy to see why the father-son bond simply cannot be overrated. Okay, I said to Heather and Randy, who were waiting in my office when I got there just before 8 on Tuesday morning. What have you got for me? Randy looked at Heather, who merely nodded in response. She reached into her backpack and handed me a neatly typed memorandum. And yours? I asked Randy. He wouldn't look at me, but Heather spoke for him. We did it jointly. I ran into him Sunday night, and we spent most of our time going over our 2 memos. Our ideas were roughly the same, so we put it all together into one neat package for you. I looked from her to him, then down at the memo. That true, Randy? Yes, he stammered. And this one memo contains all of your ideas? The ones you each had on your own? Yes, he croaked. I looked at Heather. And why did you decide to do it this way? She shrugged, not the least bit perturbed by my cool demeanor. Why should you read essentially the same thing twice? Time is money, you know, and this way you'll get all of the ideas and only have to read them once. And we did make the ideas more detailed working together, Randy added. I looked at them both long and hard. In the past, I'd had interns who did this, but only because one of them was carrying all of the weight, or they'd switch back and forth on the assignments, thereby only doing half the work during the internship for all of the pay and credit. That didn't seem to be the case here, though. Okay, I said, tossing the memo aside, then tell me what you two think is the best idea for a new way to look at this period in classical Roman history. We'll do better than that, Heather said, damned near bouncing with excitement in her chair. We even came up with a title, and it's enough for a book too. I raised my eyebrows. Then don't keep me in suspense. Was empire inevitable, she said. Meaning? Holding my hand up for Heather to be quiet so Randy could answer. He cleared his throat. Meaning, did the Roman Republic have to end? How many steps along the way could something have changed little things and big things that would have ended the brief monarchy Julius Caesar started and Octavian cemented? And why did it continue after Octavian, after Caesar Augustus died? I thought about it. Not totally original, but still a ton of different ways to tackle it. That's it? I asked. No, Heather answered before I could stifle her. We compare it to a more modern transition from republic to dictatorship to show how history repeats. Okay, Heather, I'll bite. Which modern transition do we use? America, she beamed triumphantly. Us? The United States? Her head nodded so hard though her teeth would fly out. Sure, we're not there yet. Still, look at the comparisons. Stratification of wealth. Military-industrial complex. The same tired old men and some women running our lives from Washington for year after year after year. And all of their campaigns financed by the super wealthy and the business interests. Also, those super wealthy can stay in power themselves and use the rest of us to keep them there. That sounds a lot like conspiracy theory, I said, liking the idea but wondering what else was there. It's not, Randy said. Think about it. The government waves the flag to keep everyone patriotic and focused on their pride as Americans. The Romans did the same thing. And every time there was a threat to the empire, every time the people demanded a return to the republic, the emperors did the same thing. Jesus, Professor, Heather exclaimed. It's how Caesar took total control right from the very beginning. He played the rich off against the poor, promised both something he never really delivered on, and kept them both distracted by wars and pride in each other. And Octavian was even worse, Randy said. He all but canonized Caesar before the people, so he could follow through with the civil war and keep power while executing all of his political foes. I leaned back and looked from one to the other, impressed by their work. The story of Caesar wasn't really in the book, I observed. I know, Heather said, but once the idea took root, I went back and did some quick reading on it. And you? I asked Randy. He already knew all that, Heather answered for him. My quick research consisted of reading a term paper he did for Professor Whitman's class last year. I just nodded, still leaned back in my chair, and looking from one to the other. But as I thought more about their topic, the more my smile widened. After maybe a minute of silence, they both started grinning too. It's good, isn't it? Heather asked. Uh-huh, I said. Maybe real good. There's been a lot written about the transition from republic to empire, but very little of it looked at it from the other side, from the view of what little things could have changed that would have prevented the whole slide to tyranny. She shot Randy a look, and he blushed under her scrutiny. But the smile still didn't leave his face. I'm pretty sure he was happier about Heather's approval than about mine. Okay, I said, swinging forward in my chair. Here's how this is going to happen. You two spend the next week independently researching as many sources as you can about the conditions in Rome between, say, 100 BC and 47 BC. Make that 110 BC land reforms were getting underway around then. stratification of wealth, wars, senators, and ruling bodies, maybe even how it was all but hereditary even by that time. And you will do it separately, understand? Understood, they chimed. Then get together and give me an outline. With sources. Nothing fancy. Just the basics, okay? They nodded. Then the following week, I want the same thing on the United States for post-World War II to the beginning of Bill Clinton's presidency. And include in that one as many names of long-term senators and congressmen, high-level bureaucrats, and their children or other close relatives in high government positions. Sound doable? So long as they're just the basics, Heather said. Yeah, Randy chimed in. We can't get that much depth so quickly. Just the basics for now, I confirmed, then gave them both a stern look. But one other thing you need to include in all of that. What? Randy asked. You've got your basic premise, okay? You're saying I'm saying in an article or, more likely, a book that the Roman Republic slid into dictatorship because of certain things, that altering any of countless little things could have changed that, and that those same certain things are now happening in America, right? They nodded. Well, don't be totally sold on your hypothesis, okay? Just because we think that's the case, don't set out to prove it by ignoring all evidence to the contrary. If there are any differences, I want them. And I want them highlighted, underlined 3 times, and made crystal clear, okay? Even if there's a contradiction in the sources, I want the contradiction raised. Am I making myself clear? Because that may change the hypothesis, but it still doesn't scrap the whole thing, right? Exactly, I confirmed. But if you want the whole thing to be a piece of crap, then ignore anything that disagrees with you and just bully ahead with your own set of facts. And make me look like an idiot in the process? Being selective with your facts is for demagogues, Randy said, starting one of the sayings I harped on in classes. But it's not historians, Heather finished for him. For Christ's sake, I said. You two actually listened in class? They chuckled, but their excitement over my reception of their idea and their new project was written all over both of them. After a hellish summer of misery and loneliness, the first day of classes was like slipping into a pair of old leather shoes. Familiar and comfortable. I knew what to expect, was happy to be where I was, and was relieved at the simple joy of teaching a group of young men and women who, for the most part, were equally excited about learning what I had to say. It was nice. Almost as nice as getting home to Kyle and Sunny. My routine there was also quickly becoming easy and comfortable. Not to say it didn't have its moments of crisis and loneliness and bitter memories, because it did. Still, I was learning to deal with both present and past a little better each day. Little did I know. Look, Dad, Kyle said during breakfast, prodding his finger into the picture-dominating page, one of the Lincoln County Register. I know, I said, lowering the paper. Your mom's on the front page. Why? She started a big trial yesterday. What kind of trial? Some men are charged with selling drugs. Illegal drugs. To children? I nodded. Kyle had a real soft spot for all children, which broke my heart lately given the predicament in which he now found himself. Sometimes. To adults too, though. And mom's trying to put them in jail? That's right. Good, he said, smiling for the first time at the mention of his mom. That's right too, I agreed. Then I thought of something else. She may be a little late tonight, honey. Why? Because of this trial. They sometimes run late. He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. That's okay, I guess. This seems pretty important, right? But not more important than you, little man. I know. Just can't be helped, I guess. Exactly. But it doesn't mean she loves you any less. I know, Dad, bored now with the conversation and turning back to the comics. When Whitney hadn't called by 6:30, though, I was getting pissed off. Years of experience had taught me that trials, even major felony trials, usually ended for the day by 5. That was more than enough time for her to get home, change, and come pick up Kyle. Definitely enough time for her to at least call. I started calling her cell phone and office phone at 5 minutes to 7, but ended up only leaving a string of more frustrating messages. By 9, I was too pissed off to even leave a message anymore. Kyle had been in bed for a half hour, sad and upset, and I dearly hoped she would answer so I could chew her up for good. But she still wasn't answering by 9:30, and I just gave up. What the hell did I expect? She'd blown off visitation early over the weekend, and it was now clear she was putting this trial ahead of Kyle. Again, just like she'd put it all ahead of me in our marriage. Still, she was doing this to her own kid? You're shitting me, right? My senior level seminar 20th century foreign policy decision-making finished at 2:20, and I was packing up my materials in the small classroom when I heard someone clear his throat. I looked up and saw a man and woman, both about my age and both dressed in slacks, dress shirts, sport coat on him and business jacket on her, with weary eyes and for him a natural slouch. She was pretty, tall, and slim, with hazel eyes that looked tired. Oh, and I couldn't help but notice the bulges under their armpits from their shoulder holsters. "Professor Patterson," the man said. "What can I do for you, detective?" I asked, snapping the briefcase shut and leaning against the lectern. He shot her a glance, raised an eyebrow, then turned back to me. "Shoulder holsters," I explained. "Neat haircuts, dressed in jackets. You're either police detectives, the officers usually wear uniforms, or rogue spies sent here to kidnap me, since I can't imagine why a foreign government, or even my own, for that matter, would want anything to do with me. I figure you're detectives. Am I wrong?" "Lieutenant Gavers," the man said, then nodded his head at the woman. "Sergeant Adams. What can I do for you, Lieutenant? Do you have a few minutes? We'd like to ask you some questions." I looked at my watch. "I can give you 15 minutes, then I have to get home before my son gets home from school." He looked at her again, and she shrugged. Something passed between them, in his look and her shrug, and he turned back to me and started right off with the questions. "Were you married to Whitney Patterson?" "Yes." "The prosecutor?" "That's the one." "And you're divorced now, right?" "Yes." "When's the last time you spoke with her?" "Sunday morning," I said. "Somewhere around 11. "And what was that conversation about?" "She wanted to drop Kyle off a day early. It was her weekend for visitation." "Did that make you angry?" "A little, but it ended up working out." "And why were you angry?" "None of your business." He looked at the pretty sergeant, who gave a grim smile and took over the questioning. "Did she say why she was dropping him off early?" "Yes." She waited for me to continue, but I was already a bit peeved by their attitudes and the tone of the interrogation. So screw him, I'd answered the question. Let them ask the next one. "Okay, Professor," she said, her impatience showing. "Why was she dropping him off early?" "She said she was dropping him off early," I stressed, given that I didn't really know if she was telling the truth. "Because there was nothing for Kyle to do at her apartment, he was bored, he missed his puppy, and she wanted to start prepping early for her big trial that started a couple of days ago." "But you didn't believe her?" she asked, catching the qualifier I'd put on my answer. I shrugged. I didn't really think about it. If that's what she said, that's what she said. "So you don't trust her?" Lieutenant Gavers asked, zeroing in for the kill shot I'd given him with my pedantic demand for precise answers. "She's my ex-wife, Lieutenant, as of only about a month or so ago. So you'll excuse me if I don't exactly, if we're not really on the best of terms right now." "So it was a bitter divorce?" he pressed. "Is there a cheery one?" "So it was bitter," Sergeant Adams said, writing in her notebook. When I said nothing to her restatement, Lieutenant Gavers took over again. "What did you say?" "When she said she was bringing him home, I told her to go ahead. Any plans I may have hoped for would be adjusted." "Were you angry?" "No. Not even a little?" "No." "You're telling me." "The proper way to ask the question, Lieutenant," I said, my voice going to pissed off Professor Lecture's student mode, "is, how did her request to bring him home early make you feel?" He glared at my tone, and I glared right back at him. "The answer to that question," I continued, "is frustrated." It was frustrating. We'd already rearranged the weekend schedule to give her time to get set up. Then she missed her first Wednesday night for the same reason. Now she was cutting short her first visitation for work. So I was frustrated. And sad too. For Kyle. He doesn't deserve to play second fiddle in his mother's life. I turned to Sergeant Adams, whose face softened and her gaze now avoided mine. "Write it down, Sergeant." Frustrated. "You didn't miss bitter, so don't miss this one." She turned to Gavers, and he nodded. She wrote it down. "Let's cut this short," I said. She dropped him off at the curb, didn't even bother bringing him to the door or helping him with his duffel bag or anything, and that's the last I've heard from her. "What about last night?" Sergeant Adams said. "It was a Wednesday. Did she show up?" I shook my head. Without even bothering to call. Just blew him off. And yes, that did piss me off. A lot. "So what did you do about it?" Gavers asked. "Left about 7 messages between her cell phone and her office voicemail." "When?" "Between 7 and about 9:30. "And the tone of your messages?" "Starting at pissed off and ending at extremely pissed off. You should have seen Kyle's face as the night wore on without her even bothering to take the time to at least make a phone call. I felt myself shaking with rage at the memory of my little boy's disappointment. Gavers' next words, though, popped my rage like a pin to a balloon. "She's missing," he said. "She didn't show up at work this morning. No one's seen her since she left the courthouse at just after 5 last night, Professor." My eyes went wide and darted between the two of them. So you were at home last night between, say, 4:30 and 8? Adams asked. I nodded. Anyone see you, other than your son? I nodded. My neighbors, the Romeskis. They saw me at probably about 5. We chatted for a few minutes while the kids played. Then again at about 6:30, and a couple of times after that when I went out onto the back deck to call Whitney. They were out in their yard all night? Yeah, I said, my voice cracking, my throat dry. Having a barbecue. Then Sally and Charlie just sat on the deck talking and watching their kids running around until about 7:30 or so. They weren't out there after that. I saw a movement at the door and looked over Gavers' shoulder. Professor Whitman, I said to the spry dean of history. Luke, I was. I looked at the two detectives. We're finished here, Gavers said. Sergeant Adams snapped her notebook shut while Gavers fished around his jacket pocket. Here, he said, extending a wrinkled, worn business card. You think of anything, I mean anything you call, okay? Yeah. I put the card in my pocket while I watched them leave. They both nodded to Professor Whitman as they walked past him. Luke, is now a bad time? I just stared at him, wondering what I was going to tell Kyle. What is it? It's Whitney, I said. She's disappeared. His eyes went wide. My God. Sorry, I said, snatching up my briefcase. I gotta get home before Kyle gets there. I strode past him without another look. I checked the call history on my home phone and saw a number from Sunday I didn't recognize. I dialed the number, writing it down on a piece of paper while it rang. Hello, she said. Thank God. Right on the first try. Kristen, I managed. My eyes locked on Kyle in the backyard. Look, she said. Something wrong? Can you come over here? Luke, you're scaring me. What's wrong? It's Whitney. She disappeared. Did a runner disappeared or kidnapped disappeared? I think it's the second one, I said. The cops interviewed me an hour and a half ago. She didn't show up for work this morning, and no one's seen her since last night. Maybe she just wanted to get away from everything for a while, Kristen said. Not a chance. She's right in the middle of a huge trial. If she just took off, she'd get fired and then some. Hell, she'd never work again. Maybe even lose her license or something. Kristen didn't even pause. We'll be right over. 10 minutes later, Ben charged through the house and out the sliding glass door to the backyard. Kristen was close behind him, her face anxious as she looked me over. You holding up? What do I tell him? I asked. Nothing. Not a damn thing. But what if? She set her face in grim determination. If it's the worst case scenario, you tell him when you know for sure. Otherwise just tell him she's busy and she'll spend a lot of time with him when the trial's over. Lie to him? Yes, Luke. Jesus Christ, you can't tell him she's missing. You want to tell him the truth? Tell him she's maybe in a ditch somewhere dead? Or worse, being assaulted and beaten and tortured. I shuddered. These images had raced through my mind, all of the worst-case scenarios, but Kristen was the first one to put them in words. An ex-wife or no ex-wife, Whitney was still Kyle's mother. Also, I realized for the millionth time, there was still some love in my heart for the woman who'd cast me aside like yesterday's bathwater. Listen, Kristen said, her voice getting low and steady. If he thinks she's blowing him off, he'll be hurt and angry and resentful. But sadly enough, there are others in his class hell, one in the backyard with him right now. For that matter, who've all gone through the same thing. Kyle's been dealing with it for the past 5 or 6 months, and this'll just seem like an extension of that. But if you tell him she may have disappeared or worse, Jesus, Luke, he'll be a total basket case. He'll have nightmares and it won't be good. So don't tell him what's going on unless you have to. She was right. Screw absolute morality. Nothing is black and white. The world's comprised of varying shades of gray. And if ever there was a time to lie to your child, this was damned sure one of them. So what else do I do? I asked. You let the police handle it, she said. Seeing the look on my face, she rushed to continue. I know it's not going to be easy. I know you'll feel helpless and useless and all that, but there's nothing else you can do. You're a history professor, Luke, not a trained policeman, right? Still, there's gotta be something I can do. She pulled me in and hugged me tightly. I hung my face into her shoulder and caught a whiff of her shampoo. Peaches. Same as Whitney's shampoo sometimes. You hold together, Luke, she whispered into my ear. That's what you can do. You hold it together and be strong in front of Kyle. You be there for him. That's the most important thing you can do right now, understand? I just squeezed her tighter in response, feeling better at the close contact with another human being who cared. "Now let's get some dinner going, okay?" she said, and loosened her grip on me. "We'll stay for a while so Kyle's got Ben to play with." "Thanks," was all I could think of saying. What are friends for? Then busied herself in the refrigerator looking for something to make for dinner. I slept on and off all night. The dreams came back, along with the ache in my hip, and I was being surrounded and shot at. All around me, the Iraqi soldiers were overrunning the trench, and new trenches were popping up everywhere I turned. Looking around, my platoon was either dying or dead, and still I kept shooting as the bullets tore into me. I awoke with a gasp, sitting straight up and panting for breath. My mind was still frozen on the last image in my dream. Whitney, being dragged away by a band of Iraqis, them ripping her clothes off as they dragged her, and me trying to pick them off with a massive machine gun firing fully automatic bursts that kept missing them. My head swiveled automatically, looking outside to check the bad weather I knew was coming. It was already beginning to drizzle outside, not much more than a light mist, and the skies bordering dusk and dawn were slate gray with angry thunderclouds moving across the heavens. A damp, gray dawn, like so many hundreds of others since that day in southern Iraq. And, just as with the others, my hip and upper thigh ached to the bone. Like the bullets and shrapnel were still clawing their way into my depths. The only difference between this and all the others before it was that Whitney had disappeared without a trace. On this damp, gray dawn, my boy's mother was gone. The urge to do something more, to get off my butt and go looking for her, was still squirming around my brain, still telling me I needed to act. Then Kristen's words came back, and I couldn't fault her logic. What the hell did I know about finding a kidnapping victim? But there was something there, something I couldn't put my fingers on. The more I thought, the more my brain refused to cooperate in bringing it to the forefront. 2 hours later, though, Kyle noticed something and commented on it. That's when it hit me. All of it. Not just the answers to my endless questions, but the whole picture just came out of nowhere and punched me right between the eyes. When it hit me like a freight train, I decided was compelled to ignore Kristen's advice and Gavers's demands, and, to a large degree, common sense. Whitney's disappearance and the resulting delay in the Labrazi heroin trafficking trial was front-page news in the Register. I read the article twice, looking at the pictures on the front page of both Whitney and of the Labrazi's defense attorney, Lawton Dunlop. He looked like a typical narcotics defense attorney, the type in all the television shows. Expensive blue suit, white shirt with French cuffs and diamond-encrusted cufflinks, square jaw, wide smile with perfectly capped teeth, and hair perfectly coiffed and held in place with so much hairspray it could catch a bullet. He oozed slime from his pores. Just as when I woke up, something in the article started that little worm in my brain going all over again. Something about the bare facts that Whitney had disappeared and Lawton Dunlop's demands for an immediate resumption of continuing the trial or declaring a mistrial, which he claimed would end in the permanent dismissal of all charges against his client. When I held the paper up, exposing the front page to Kyle, the bombshell dropped. "Why's Mommy in the paper?" he said. "And Charlie?" I lowered the paper, my eyes narrowing. "Charlie?" He pointed to the pictures on the front page. "Sure, Charlie. He's a lawyer like Mommy. He came over on Sunday morning while I was eating." I flipped the paper back to the front page. Lawton Dunlop. I pointed to the picture. "This is the man she called Charlie?" "Yeah," he said, then went back to reading his comics, forgetting about his initial questions. I, though, sat there dumbstruck. Charlie. Charles Lawton Dunlop. CLD. cldlaw@linkedin.net. It wasn't the email address for Cahill, Levine, and Dunleavy. It was Charles Lawton Dunlop's email address. Whitney had been screwing the Labrazi's defense attorney while the case was pending, and now it was in trial with a strong case, by all appearances, and Whitney had disappeared. Sorry, folks, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why Whitney was suddenly missing. I left the table to go find Gavers's business card so I could share with him my newfound information. Card in hand, I picked up the phone and stepped out onto the deck to make the call away from Kyle's ears. Just before I started dialing the number, though, another series of thoughts began tumbling through my brain. When did Dunlop begin going after Whitney? Presumed answer, once she was assigned to the Labrazi prosecution. Why did he go after her? Presumed answers, to get inside information on the prosecution's case. To somehow get her off the case and get another, less able, prosecutor assigned. To conspire with her to throw the trial. All of the above, or some combination of the above. If so, if he was already their defense attorney of record, why did Whitney even allow it to happen? That would have created a scandal that would have derailed her career. Before dialing Gavers, I needed to do some research. "What are you doing, Dad?" Kyle asked, putting his bowl and glass into the dishwasher. "I'll only be a few minutes," I said, rushing to the den and clicking onto the net. A search of the register's archives gave me all the information I needed in less than 10 minutes. When the Labrazzis were initially arraigned, they'd had some attorney named Leland Smithers. Smithers had stayed on the case until 3 months ago, at which time Dunlop's name started appearing in the papers as the attorney for the defense. 3 months ago, well after our divorce was filed, my eyes stared at the screen, the anger surging through my veins. That sleazy prick had set out to destroy my marriage so he could get an advantage in securing the acquittals of a couple of low-life heroin dealers. Driving Kyle to school, I reached my decision. Screw Gavers, and screw the police, and screw Charles Lawton Dunlop. This was personal, and I wanted my revenge. My Thursday classes were both morning classes, and the second was finished by noon. To this day, I don't really remember much about the classes. I just stood there and rambled on about the whatever the hell was in the book's first issues, gave terse answers to questions posed, and damn near sprinted to my car when the second class was finally finished. Look, I heard Doug calling from behind me. I didn't stop though. Instead, I waved, hopped in my car, and tore out of there. I needed to think, to formulate a plan, and, of course, to get as much information as humanly possible in the next 5 hours. I didn't want to rush off half-cocked and act on presumptions while discarding any facts that disagreed with my hypothesis. There was, I suppose, the chance that Charles Lawton Dunlop was not the mystery man. Still, the chance seemed slim. If nothing else, the additional information would give me the planning stage intelligence vital to a successful operation. 3 hours later, I was in my den, head back, deep in thought. My research had turned up some interesting facts. First, Charles Lawton Dunlop had been an attorney for 14 years, and he was just shy of 40. He had been practicing criminal defense law his entire career, first with the Public Defender's Office, but on his own for the past 9 years. His record on cases that went to trial was somewhere around 50-50, which seemed awfully damned good. Most of his cases never went to trial, though. Rather, they were frequently dropped for no apparent reason. Moreover, the newspaper accounts of his trials strongly suggested that several of the jury acquittals were out of the blue. Thus, it seems Dunlop had a shady background, which led to the obvious questions. How did Whitney not know about his background, and, assuming she did, why would she ever succumb to his advances without being more wary? That, of course, led me to the more depressing conclusion that she was ripe for the picking. That our marriage was already dead so far as she was concerned. Second, the Labrazzis were Carlo and Vincent. They owned a string of 14 pizza parlors throughout the Chicago suburbs, and the news accounts strongly hinted they were connected to, if not made members of, the Chicago outfit. In the newspaper pictures, Carlo was around 50, short, chunky, and bald. Vincent was the younger by a few years, also short, but lean and wiry with thinning hair combed straight back and acne scars covering his cheeks and chin. Carlo looked like a waddling porky pig with fat lips, Vincent like a ferret-faced thug with thin lips. In both pictures, though, they looked dangerous. Something about the way they impassively stared at the booking camera gave me the chills. Third, the Labrazzis were being tried in state court for distributing heroin through their pizza parlors, but the state court case was a warm-up for a larger federal indictment for RICO violations. The indictments for that had only come down the previous month and were predicated on the theory that the drugs were being shipped into the country and then across state lines with pizza-making inventory. Most speculation was that if the state case failed, the Labrazzis would still go down on the federal case. Still, if they didn't beat the state case first, the results of the federal case would be irrelevant. They'd get 50 years plus on the state charges. So I had a scumbag mob lawyer and his 2 mob clients. I had to figure out what they'd done with Whitney and, assuming she wasn't already dead, how to get her back. In the process, I had to connect Dunlop to the kidnapping and maybe murder without anyone finding out I'd done anything. Sure, Carlo and Vincent Labrazzi had at least a hand in Dunlop's scheme that ended my marriage, but I still didn't want to run afoul of the mob. It would be nice to snare them in, too, but not a priority. And that's when I began to have some serious doubts. If I was caught here, I was putting Kyle's life at risk. I didn't need a bunch of gangster a-holes gunning for me and catching Kyle in the crossfire. I also didn't need to be on the run for the rest of my life, shooing my son from secret location to secret location. I was about to give up when the doorbell rang. Professor Patterson, Lieutenant Gavers said when I opened the door, "May we come in for a moment?" I looked at my watch. 10 after 3. Kyle would be home any minute. "This way," I said, leading them to the back deck. "Kyle doesn't know anything yet, and I don't want him to find out anything until we know what's going on." Gavers, with the pretty Sergeant Adams in tow, followed me through the house to the back deck. I let Sun Tzu charge out ahead of us, then slid the door closed behind us when they got out. Heard anything yet? I asked. He paused, then turned to Sergeant Adams. We have a few follow-up questions, she said, flipping open her notebook. I waited, glaring at them. Did your ex-wife wear any jewelry? I closed my eyes, picturing her. Yes, a round, gold locket on a gold chain. There was a picture of Kyle inside. She nodded, then made a checkmark in the notebook. Then she sighed and looked at Gavers. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing, then turned to me. Why did you get divorced? He asked. None of your business. He sighed. I'm afraid it is my business, Professor. It's very much my business. And unless you want us to arrest you and take you in for questioning of a more formal nature, you'll answer my question. Now, why did you get divorced? We know you filed. So why? I looked from him to her. Adams's face showed embarrassment at the whole thing, but Gavers's just showed patience. I looked at Adams when I responded, because she said she didn't love me anymore. After all our years together, she just didn't love me anymore. She was bored. In a rut, she said. I don't know why. I didn't beat her. I make good money, take care of the house and Kyle and her. I felt the emotion rising in my throat and fought to hold it down. My final words were a forced croak. I still don't know why. Adams looked at the ground, stock still, when I finished. Was she seeing someone else? Gavers said, plodding forward. I don't know. I lied, then softened the lie. Maybe. She wouldn't tell me. Just that there was someone, but it wasn't romantic. That's what she said, at least. Do you know who this somebody may have been? I turned and looked at him. He was staring at me intently, and I forced myself to maintain eye contact when I answered. Not a clue. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his right eyebrow rose. Any guesses? I shook my head. Could have been anyone. Someone she works with, something like that. She worked long hours. She was always coming home at 7:30 or 8. She had plenty of time. He just stared at me. He knew I was lying. As much as I tried to hold it back, there was something in his face that all but forced the smirk on my lips. The smirk that told him, yeah, I know you know I'm lying. Now try to do something about it. You know, he said after a moment, this paints you in a whole different light. How so? She was cheating. You're divorced now, but you're still pissed. Furious, even. Furious enough to maybe want to kill her. Really? I said. Really? He agreed. Good luck proving it, I said, unable to keep from sneering at him. I have a rock-solid alibi for the whole damn night, and you know it. I saw the uniforms interviewing Sally Remeska next door when I got home. Or didn't you speak with them yet? Maybe you got someone else to do it for you. I laughed, a bitter, impatient laugh. Yeah, right. I did a quick internet search for hit men who kill cheating wives, paid the retainer, and they came right on over. Wouldn't be the first time, Adams said, rejuvenated by Gavers's aggressive questioning. I know, I said. Family member or ex-husband's the first one you look at. Makes sense. But you've already looked, and you know it's bullshit. You know, Gavers said, trying a different tack, if you're withholding something anything, you can be charged with accessory. Nice try, Lieutenant, but no dice. And screw the obstruction of justice charge you're gonna threaten me with next, too. Good luck on both of them. He just stared at me, his jaw finally flexing with his frustration and anger. So if we're done here, I said, seeing the front door open, I think my son's home. They both glared at me, but then Sergeant Adams recognized the futility of further questioning when I walked past them and back into the house. Hey, little man, I said, scooping him into my arms while they walked past me and let themselves out the front door. We spent the next hour getting his homework done. Then Kyle went outside to play with the Remeska kids and Sonny. I spent the time thinking the whole thing through. Point number 1. If I told the cops what I knew, they'd only bring Dunlop in for questioning. He'd never crack, come on. He's an attorney, for Christ's sake. Worse, assuming he didn't crack, his only recourse would be to kill Whitney and hide the body somewhere it could never be found. Sorry, but police rules favor the criminals. I, though, was under no such constraints. Point number 2. Yes, Whitney had apparently cheated on me and worse, in my eyes, and the real reason for the divorce rejected me. But that didn't mean I wanted my son's mother to die a horrible death. Assuming she was still alive, I had to save her. Also, I had to make damn sure I wasn't killed in the process. Sure, I wanted to live, but my bigger fear was leaving Kyle as an orphan. Point number 3. Assuming I could find Whitney and she was still alive, I had to accomplish all of this without anyone finding out or even having the slightest suspicion I was behind it. The mobsters scared me more than the cops, but both scared me plenty. Getting killed was bad, but going to prison for a long stretch was nearly as bad. Point number 4. I had to do all of this on my own. Conspiracies are only as strong as the weakest conspirator. Thus, the more people involved in any way, the more likely I'd get caught by someone. That's when I went to the basement and opened my weapons safe, the beginning of a plan forming in my head. I pulled out the Colt AR-15 I'd owned for years. Laying it on a table, I field stripped it, then spent the next 15 minutes thoroughly cleaning and lubing the disassembled weapon. Next, I loaded 3 20-round clips with ammo, then stacked them next to the rifle. Next, Glock 9mm came out, and I repeated the process of cleaning and filling clips. Finished in little more than 30 minutes, I placed them all in a duffel bag along with a black ski mask, black sweatpants, black shoes, socks, and sweatshirt. I hesitated before deciding against the black shoe polish for my hands. That would be hard to explain away if I was caught, and it would be damned near impossible to thoroughly get off of my hands for a few days at least. By the time I was done, the plan was almost fully formed. And that's when I remembered something I'd been ignoring, and decided to check on just in case it yielded anything of value. Strangely enough, it yielded a bonanza, and it all but confirmed my hypothesis. Once logged in, I clicked on the sole remaining email. "Luke, I'm so sorry. Dear Luke," she wrote, "by now you know it all. You know I lied. You know I cheated. You may have even figured out who he is. If you haven't, his name is Charles Dunlop. He's a lawyer, and a good one. I don't really know how it all got started. I remember being upset with you. With me, really, but I blamed you. I was feeling guilty. Guilty because you do so much. So many of the things that I always wanted to do. Taking care of the cooking and cleaning and Kyle. Those were things I should have been doing. Things I should have at least been helping you a lot more with. On the other hand, I was a hair's breadth away from the top slot in the office. Chief of the criminal division. After 10 years, I was so close to realizing my potential, and I felt guilty that I was realizing it at the expense of my family. So how did this become your fault? Because, I now realize, I blamed you for taking up the slack I left to pursue my career. I know, it doesn't make any sense. I see that now. But at the time, I was thinking that if you'd stood up to me more, if you'd have at least bitched about having to take care of everything, then I'd have been forced to cut back at work and spend more time doing the things I should have been doing all along. Pretty screwed up, right? Just writing this, it still doesn't make sense to me. I was blaming you because you were supporting me and my goals, and I was giving you very little in return. I don't know how Charlie spotted this, but he did. He saw my unhappiness, and he went out of his way to cheer me up and to seduce me, and I let him. I wish I had an excuse, a justification that could somehow make all of this your fault. I don't. None of it was your fault. Your sole mistake was to be there for Kyle and me, to always give 110% without complaint. I know now the enormity of my mistake. Actually, I knew that Saturday I left you with Kyle to meet with Charlie. That's why I broke it off that day. And I wanted to come home and somehow get you to forgive me. But you didn't. I don't blame you for any of this. If the roles had been reversed, I'd have never forgiven you, either. I do know a few things, though. For example, I know my biggest mistake wasn't cheating on you with Charles. Sure, that was probably unforgivable. Nor was my biggest mistake refusing to just come clean and tell you everything, which was also unforgivable. No, my biggest mistake was in ever telling you that I didn't love you anymore and didn't want to stay married. The first 2 mistakes were probably deal breakers, but the third mistake was the superglue that sealed the death of our marriage. I want you to know that I will never forgive myself for any of this. For cheating on you, for refusing to come clean, and worst of all, for ever allowing you to believe that any of this was your fault. The fault was mine and mine alone. So many times, after you filed for divorce, I wanted to tell you all of this. But I saw your pain every day, the pain I'd caused you. Looking at that pain, I knew I didn't deserve you back and that you deserved someone who would never do this to you. To this day, I can barely stand to look at you without my shame overwhelming me. In closing, Luke, I know that what I have done has ruined my marriage, my husband, my son, and all of us as a family. I wish I could take it back. I sit alone in my apartment every night dreaming of the past and wondering what the hell I was thinking. I just wanted you to know, though, that I have one last trial coming up, and it's a biggie. I'm going to win it, and then I'll be offered the position I've always dreamed of, chief of the criminal division. When they make me that offer, I'm going to resign. I'm going to rededicate myself to being a mother to our little boy. I only hope you won't prevent me from doing this. It is the only dream I now have to keep me sane. And I want to do my fair share so you can take the time to rebuild your own life after my cheating. With eternal shame and everlasting love, Whitney. I'll admit it. My eyes were wet by the time I finished reading Whitney's confession. My mind was filled with what-ifs. What if she'd have come clean that day? Would I have taken her back and tried to overcome her cheating? What if I'd have paid more attention months before when she'd begun withdrawing? Could I have prevented the whole thing? If. The saddest goddamned word in the English language. Yet, now my suspicions had been confirmed. All I could wonder was whether Whitney had ever put the pieces together on Dunlop's nefarious scheme before she disappeared. And if so, how had she reacted upon learning that she destroyed her marriage to be with a man who didn't give two shits for her or her problems, but only wanted to gain the advantage in a criminal case? My sadness turned to a simmering rage as I deleted the message and wiped all traces of it from my hard drive. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful in hiding my emotions when Kristen and Ben showed up. She took one look at me and turned to Ben and told him to go outside and play, her eyes on me the whole time. "You know who it is, don't you?" she said when Ben was outside. "You know where she is." I didn't move. "What are you going to do?" she pressed. "I need you to watch Kyle tonight," was all I managed. "Luke," she pleaded, "you have to call the police. You can't do this on your own. Jesus, you'll get killed. Then where will Kyle be?" I shook my head. "I can't really say anything, Kristen." "Bullshit," she hissed, her eyes darting outside to make sure the boys were out of range before turning back to me. "You're gonna go out and act like some kind of friggin' cowboy, maybe get killed or at least shot or stabbed without thinking even for a second about what'll happen to Kyle if that happens." "What the hell?" "Bullshit," I hissed right back at her. "You think I haven't thought about that? But what happens if I call the cops, huh? I'll tell you. She gets killed so they can't get caught. That's what happens. If they haven't killed her already, then what do I tell Kyle?" "But Luke," she said, her eyes pleading with me to reconsider. "There's got to be another way." I shook my head. "I've been thinking about it all day, since this morning when I figured it all out. There's no other way, believe me. You think I want to do this?" She stayed silent, her eyes pleading with me to not leave, but the reality of my words sinking in. "Trust me," I said, "I've thought about nothing but Kyle. And bottom line is this. I can never again look at Kyle if Whitney's killed, if he has to go to his mother's funeral. I knew all along that maybe I could have stopped it. Or, if she dies, if I can at least catch the rotten scumsucker who did this." She was shaking now, the fear and enormity of the situation running through her face and limbs. "Promise me you won't get hurt," she said. "Please, Luke. Promise me you'll be careful." I tried to smile. "You just keep an eye on the boys tonight and I'll be back by midnight or so, okay?" Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and I brushed them off with my fingertips. "Get yourself together," I said. "Keep an eye on the boys. It'll work out, okay?" She nodded. "Okay." I left at 8, just before the sun would set. This plan had to be carried out at night. I had no idea how many of them there were, where I was going, or what I would do when I got there. Darkness and surprise would be my only allies. As I pulled out of the driveway, though, I saw the car parked down the block slowly start rolling with its headlights turned off. I had company. I drove slowly, giving no one cause to pull me over and discover my cache of weapons. Getting caught would get Whitney disappeared for good. 20 minutes later, I drove slowly past Charles Dunlop's law office. There were no lights on and no cars in the parking lot. I kept my fingers crossed that he was home, and that he actually lived at the address listed in the phone book. My plan was risky, but it seemed the only way to lure him out and get him to lead me to Whitney or, in the alternative, her killers. I was still being followed, and I finally made the identity of the driver when I cruised through a well-lit intersection. Sergeant Adams. I was right. They knew I was hiding the identity, and they had guessed I intended to do something about it. Great, I thought. Now I've got to avoid them while trying to save Whitney. I started running through scenarios in my mind, all of which depended on whether backup would be joining the pretty detective. It had been like this during my military career. Make a great plan, set the plan in motion, and something comes along to screw it all up. Throughout history, the great tacticians had all been able to deal with the changes and improvise solutions on the fly. Unfortunately, I wasn't a great tactician. I was a West Point-trained infantry leader who had been permanently knocked out in my first combat engagement. I hadn't thought like an infantry soldier in nearly 20 years, and none of it was coming back as quickly as I'd hoped. I pushed the newest developments from my mind when I pulled in front of Dunlop's house. The living room was lit up, and I saw a figure through the gauzy drapes moving around inside. It was now or never. I mulled over the plan again, knowing that if I followed through and did not succeed, I was signing Whitney's death warrant. There was no chance they'd keep her alive if they thought the cops were onto them. Likewise, There was no way to get them to tip their hands unless they thought the cops were onto them, deciding they'd probably kill Whitney either way. If they hadn't done so already, I pulled the disposable cell phone from my pocket and dialed the pre-programmed number. Dunlop answered on the second ring. "Hello? This is gonna be short and sweet," I said into the phone. "Who is this?" "Be quiet. This is a friend. That's all you need to know for now." He paused, then asked, "What do you want?" "You're being bugged," I said. "Office phones, cell phone, home phone." He said nothing, and I plowed on. "The wiretap warrants were signed this afternoon. Your name's all over one of them. You shouldn't have to guess whose names are on the other two. And you're sharing this with me? Because I'll make myself known to you down the road," I said. "When I do, I'll expect you to show your appreciation. And your friends too. And how can I believe you? How can you afford not to?" I shot back. "Either way, this conversation's over with. I'm not saying any more in case the bugs are already in place." With that, I snapped the cell phone shut, pulled into the far end of the cul-de-sac, and waited to see if Dunlop took the bait. I didn't see where Sergeant Adams had parked, but I assumed she was outside the cul-de-sac where she'd see us both as we left. 10 minutes later, Dunlop strode out of his front door, looked left and right, then slid into his Cadillac and pulled out. I smiled, pleased with myself. I started my own car and followed the Cadillac, staying well behind him. And like a scene from Keystone Cops, Sergeant Adams followed behind me. Within minutes, we were cruising down country roads at speeds nearing 70. My worst nightmare, I realized as I threw the cell phone out the window and into a creek. If I try to keep up with Dunlop, Adams has a reason to pull me over and Whitney is never seen again. If I don't try to keep up with Dunlop, I lose him and Whitney gets killed. That's when I made my first improvisation. I decided to keep up with Dunlop and hope Adams and probably Gavers, too, would realize I was following the kidnapper. If they knew I was holding back on them, then they had to know who I was now following. I trusted them to let me keep following Dunlop rather than stop me and let Dunlop go. I pressed my foot on the accelerator to catch up with the disappearing taillights in front of me. 2 miles later, Adams had still not pulled me over. Instead, she was keeping pace with me about a quarter-mile back. I smiled, knowing we could lose each other on this long, lonely country road. Yet, just as I congratulated myself on nerves of steel, the Cadillac's taillights turned and disappeared. I slowed down to 50, not wanting to risk going past him too slowly if he was waiting in a turnoff ahead. Even at 50, I damned near missed the half-overgrown dirt trail leading into the woods. A few hundred yards into the woods, I saw a brief flicker of bouncing red taillights, and I eased the car to a stop in the ditch ahead, pulling well off the road. Adams had slowed down behind me. I pulled my mask down, grabbed the duffel bag, and was out of the car and into the woods before Adams saw where I'd gone. I watched from the edge of the woods while Adams slowed down, then came to a complete stop in the roadway parallel with my car. She flashed a light into my car, spoke briefly into a cell phone, then pulled over in front of my car. I was well into the woods, walking a course parallel with the overgrown trail, before I heard her car door slam in the distance behind me. It was a moonless night, and the undergrowth was still damp from the morning's rain. I was soaking wet from the waist down before I'd gone 50 yards, but my mind was charged with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. It had always been like this in the Army. The tense planning sessions followed by calm followed by tension times 10 once the plan was set in motion. This one was a lot more like that morning all those years before, though. The morning I went into combat across the Iraqi frontier. The morning I knew they'd be shooting back with real bullets and people were going to die. Then it was tension combined with a cold, numbing fear. Senses so attuned and twitchy a mosquito fart at 100 yards had me ducking and searching the darkness. Now it was worse. Now, I was out of practice and out of shape and I'd lost the bravado of youth. 300 yards in, the trail meandered to the left and reached a break in the woods. I stopped there, looking at the open space in front of me. Down a gentle slope, no more than 75 yards in front of me was a rusty, dilapidated metal shed. The red Cadillac was parked in front, next to an old Ford pickup truck. Without conscious thought, my eyes surveyed the terrain for tactical features and ideas. As I said, the shed sat in the middle of a small punch bowl in the earth, the ground sloping down to the shed from where I stood. Good for me, bad for them. I would have the high ground with the added bonus of forest concealment, while they would be pinned down and unable to pass me without exposing themselves. The vehicles, while not hiding the door into the shed, were parked close enough that they could make a run for the vehicles and, if they got there, have half a chance of getting past me. I couldn't fire at them if Whitney was with them, too much chance of hitting her. Thus, the vehicles needed to be disabled. There was a propane tank 60 feet or so to the left of the shed. This had to be avoided at all costs. There could be no chance of a stray shot hitting the tank and possibly killing us all. On the right side of the shed, I saw soft light coming from windows. There was nothing else there except bare grass up the gentle slope to the edge of the forest. Picturing the angles in my mind, I made my decision. If I was situated at the edge of the woods to my right, I'd have clear angles to see inside the shed and clear shots at anyone coming out the door toward the vehicles. The only downside was that a missed shot could hit the propane tank, but that didn't faze me. 75 yards from a prone position down a hill with an AR-15? No matter how out of practice I was, there was no way I'd miss what I was aiming at from that distance. My basic plan formed. I crept along the wood line to my left to commence my reconnaissance. Crouching low and staying on the edge, I circled around the punch bowl, keeping an eye out for sound and movement as I went. When I was opposite where I'd started, I took a deep breath, counted silently to 10, and scurried down the slope toward the shed. "Say a thing about offing her, man," I heard a whiny voice say from inside the shed. The voice was clear and slurring the words, and I assumed the windows were open. I smelled a strange odor coming from inside the shed, metallic and medicinal and off-putting. "Don't worry," another voice said, yelling at the first voice. "You won't have to do it." "Me? Neither. They're coming themselves to take care of it. We just need to wait for them here. It's still a murder rap if we get caught, though," voice one whined. "I didn't sign up for no murder rap. And kidnapping seems okay to you? Murder's out, but you'll face 20 or 30 years for kidnapping? You're okay with that? Because I'm sure the shit not okay with it." "Silence," voice one said. "You hear that? There's nothing out there," voice two said, his voice still going low. "You've been smoking too much of your own shit. Screw you." I heard footsteps, then a shuffling and a muffled voice. A woman's voice, I realized, with her mouth probably taped shut. It was Whitney, of that I was sure. She was still alive, and they were now doing what my phone call had spurred them to do. They were waiting for someone else to show up so they could kill her. "Might as well take the blindfold off her," voice two said. "She won't be able to identify anyone after tonight." "Let them do it," voice one pouted. I'd heard enough, though, and didn't hear the response. I made my way back up to the edge of the woods and moved clockwise along the wood line. My eyes roamed the ground in front of me, checking firing lines to my right as I moved along. Seeing the open view of the doorway, I stopped, dropped the duffel bag, and retrieved my weapons. The Glock went into my waistband in the small of my back. Then I laid flat, my body molding into the damp grass, my arms cradling the butt of the rifle into my chest. I sighted along the barrel, then flicked the safety switch to semi-automatic. "This is where I'd have planted myself, too," Gavers said to my rear. I froze, staying glued to the ground. I heard his pistol cock behind me. "Drop the rifle. Now." My body sagged as I flipped the rifle back to safe. "When we came out of the woods," he said, his voice low and matter-of-fact, "you were already circling around. Pretty good, by the way. But you should have stayed lower and watched something other than the shed." I heard the rustle through the undergrowth, then felt his feet on the ground behind me. "Then I looked at it all and knew what you were doing," he continued. "Line of fire to keep them pinned in. Good plan." "She's alive," I said. "She's in there, and she's alive." Off to my left, I heard someone suck in their breath. Gavers was silent for a moment. "Did you hear her?" Adams said. "Yes. Sure it was her. It was a woman. Her mouth was taped or something. I didn't see anyone, but I could hear them." "How many?" Gavers said. "Two for sure. I don't think there's anyone else, but two for sure. One of them's Dunlop. The other's high on something." "Meth," Adams said. "You can smell it. This place is a meth lab, sure as shit. Any more surprises before we cuff you to the tree over there?" Gavers asked. "There are more on the way," I said. "They're waiting for someone else to show up. That someone's going to kill her and get rid of the body." I heard a snort from Adams. But her voice was cut off when a pair of headlights broke from the edge of the woods and started slowly down the gentle slope to the shed. "You don't have any rifles," I said, flipping the rifle back to semi-automatic fire. "Don't do it," Adams said. "You need me," I insisted. "It's just the two of you, and now you're outnumbered big time. And you don't have a rifle. They'll kill her. You know they will. And without me, there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it." I heard Gavers move, quickly and not so silently. "You keep them pinned down," he whispered back at me before breaking from the edge of the woods. "And don't let whoever it is out of that car." Adams started to protest, then thought better of it. Instead, she crouched down next to me. "You could have told us," she said. "And you wouldn't have been able to do shit," I said, my eyes focusing on the car slowing down near the shed. I shot my eyes to the right and saw that Gavers was still exposed, less than 20 feet down the slope. Back on the car, though, I decided I couldn't wait. I took a breath and squeezed the trigger. The car lurched simultaneously with the crack of the rifle, and I turned the barrel to the left. It took 2 shots to take out the left tire, but it left the car 20 feet from the other vehicles. "What the hell?" someone shouted down below, and I saw the front door swing open. A tall, cadaverous figure stepped into the light cast by the open door, and I put a shot high up the door frame. "Don't hit him," Adams warned as the figure dropped to the ground and looked around wildly before scrambling back inside. "Shut up," I hissed, turning back to the car and putting 2 shots into the grill. Steam started hissing from under the hood almost immediately. They were well and truly screwed now, and I knew it. "He's there," Adams whispered, her voice losing all excitement and turning flat. I glanced to the shed and saw Gavers, his back against the shed next to the window, pistol held high. I sighted back to the vehicles in front of the shed and, in 4 shots, took out the front tires on the Cadillac and the pickup truck. For good measure, I put 2 rounds each into the grills, and the Cadillac also started spouting steam. I saw the passenger door open on the new vehicle, the one I knew contained at least one, if not both, of the Labrazzis. I put a round into the door, and it slammed shut. "He's pointing," Adams intoned. I looked back, grabbing a clip as I did so, and saw Gavers holding up his hand and making a shooting sign toward the end of the shed nearest the vehicles. I slammed the clip home, aimed high on the far side of the shed, and pumped 5 rounds into the building. As I did so, Gavers extended his arms and pistol through the open window. I saw only 1 shot, then Gavers was climbing through the window. The front door burst open at the same time, and Dunlop started careening around the vehicles and through the woods. "He's getting away," Adams said, "by the propane tank." I ignored both Adams and the fleeing figure of Charles Lawton Dunlop. My eyes stayed locked on the Labrazzis. They were both still alive, and there wasn't a doubt in my mind they had weapons. "You," I said, my eyes staying down the line of the barrel, "get your butt around behind them, then come in low. Stay in the tree line." But they've got the guns, and Gavers is alone in that shed. If only one of them gets out of that car and to that shed, we've got problems. Without another word, she sprinted off. A minute later, I saw someone coming back out through the window. She was being shoved out the window from behind and falling with a sluggish thud to the ground 4 feet below. I recognized the hair and the frail figure and, for the briefest of moments, allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. Whitney was safe. For now. She started stumbling up the slope toward the woods opposite the cars, keeping the shed between her and the Labrazzis. Good. I turned back to the Labrazzis. Behind their car, I saw a movement on the slope and knew Adams was coming down behind them. Needing to keep their attention on me, I fired 5 rounds into the front of their car. Without warning, an arm reached out the passenger side of the car and squeezed off 5 rounds in my direction. I ate dirt, trying to dig myself in as deeply as possible. I heard the bullets hitting trees and ground only 4 or 5 feet to my left. They had finally seen my muzzle flashes and knew where I was. Though I knew pistols were worthless at that range, all it took was 1 lucky shot to send me to my maker. "Drop your guns," I heard Adams scream. I looked up. She was standing behind and to the left of the car, her arms extended with her pistol pointing at them from behind. "Now," she screamed. "Out the windows. Now." After a brief pause, I saw movement and thuds as the pistols hit the ground. Next, Gavers flew out of the building and took up position behind and to the right of the vehicle. He said something, but I couldn't hear him. He said something more, and both car doors opened. Then the Labrazzis stuck their arms out, followed by their bodies, and lay flat on the ground next to the car. Once I saw them cuffed, I hopped up and grabbed my duffel bag. With a final look at the shed below, I turned right and began sprinting along the tree line. When I saw her just inside the woods, I slowed down. Whitney was looking at the shed, shaking uncontrollably, her face a mask of horror. "You'll be okay," I whispered as I drew nearer. She twisted and shrank back, trying to make herself as small as possible. I stopped in front of her and held my hand out for hers. "It's me," I said from behind the ski mask. "You're gonna be okay." In slow motion, her hand reached out to mine. When our fingertips touched, she jerked her hand away, then reached back and clasped me in a death grip. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you back to them, okay?" Whitney didn't seem to hear me, but she followed along without hesitation. As we neared the shed, I stopped. "You're safe now," I said. Her hand squeezed mine tighter, refusing to let go. "I've got to get out of here, Whit," I said. You've got to let go. You're safe now. Still, she wouldn't let go. If I'm still here when backup arrives, I said, it's gonna be bad. I'll get arrested. The Labrazis may come after me. They may come after Kyle, Whitney. You've got to let me go now. That seemed to sink in, and Whitney released my hand. Remember, I said, my hand on her chin. I was never here. Got it? Her head stuttered up and down. Without another word, I turned and sprinted to my right. Once back in the tree line, I made my way around the punch bowl and straight up the path toward the road. I had to get the hell out of there before any more cops showed up. And I had to hope and pray that Gavers and Adams would keep their mouths shut. Near the road, I heard sirens wailing in the distance. They'd be there any minute. Reaching in my pocket for the car keys, I heard a scraping from behind and turned. Without warning, the wind was driven from me as I was knocked backward to the ground. Who the hell are you? Dunlop screamed, clawing at the mask on my face. I said nothing, concentrating all my effort on breaking free of him. He cocked his right arm back to punch me, and I pushed off with all my strength and rolled up and into him, nullifying whatever blow he had planned. Still he wouldn't let go. Rolling again onto my back, I felt the gouge of metal into my upper buttocks and knew what I had to do. Continuing the roll, I reached back and brought the Glock out. Holding the gun like a rock, I pummeled Dunlop repeatedly on the side of the head until I felt his body go limp. Not waiting to check for a pulse, I scrambled to my feet and got in my car. 15 seconds later, I was driving away from the sirens, popping one after another over the rise in the road behind me. To my relief, I saw them all come to a halt near Adams's car parked on the side of the road. Slowing back down to the speed limit, I took the very next left 2 miles up and made my way toward the last stop of the night before going home. Dressed now in jeans, sweatshirt, and deck shoes, I stood on the edge of the abandoned gravel pit. The adrenaline was finally gone, and my body was overcome with fatigue. Still, I needed to get this as far out there as possible. With a mighty heave, I threw the duffel bag with my clothes and what was left of the ammo as far into the black waters as I could. Then, silently, I watched it float for a moment before sinking with the weight of the 5 bricks inside. I'd already thrown the rifle's disassembled bolt mechanism into a creek on my way to the pit, and the rest of both weapons had been broken down and tossed down the various monitoring wells still littering the landscape around the pit. I suppose if anyone ever found one, they'd have a good shot at finding them all. Still, I found it hard to believe any such efforts would ever be made. And the whole point would be moot either way if Gavers and Adams came for me. Though neither had seen my face, Adams surely had my license plate's number from following me to the shed. Still, better safe than sorry, right? The living room was dark, and I tiptoed across the floor. Are you all right? Kristen said from the couch. I stopped, relieved and overcome with exhaustion. I'm fine, I whispered. I heard her sniffle. Then a small sob broke from her lips. Then I felt her squeezing me hard. Her robe and flimsy pajamas were so soft and warm. I just wanted to hold her against me forever. Quickly, though, my strength began to fade. And Whitney? Kristen said. She's fine too. Alive and for the most part unharmed. And whoever it was? She asked, breaking the hug. I saw her shiny eyes searching mine. Cops got him, I said. She hugged me again, but I began to sag toward the floor. Feeling my collapse, Kristen helped me to the couch. Once seated, her lips were all over me, kissing my lips and nose and eyes and hugging me. It's gonna be okay, she said to herself over and over again, as if she didn't really believe the words coming from her own mouth. I didn't say anything, wondering when Gavers and Adams were going to show up to take me in. I was too tired to care, though, and just allowed Kristen to wind down her pent-up emotions. I was so scared, she finally said, sitting on the couch holding me. Me too, I said, starting to nod off. She saw my fatigue and brushed my cheek with the back of her hand. Go to sleep, she said, then pulled me sideways so my head was in her lap. My last thoughts were how good it felt while Kristen ran her fingers through my hair and massaged my right shoulder. So comforting, so loved. It was like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. All too soon, my breath got ragged with my impending release, and Kristen leaned in and kissed me long and hard. Let it go, she said. She leaned forward and kissed me. Then, once again, the darkness washed over me. I awoke on the couch, covered in a blanket with a pillow under my head. Sun Tzu was nestled into my chest, snoring lightly. Hungry? Kristen said, leaning in close. She looked bright and chipper, well-rested and happy as a lark. I started to say no, but a low gurgling from my stomach awoke the pup who looked at me with terror on his face. Kristen chuckled and didn't wait for me to answer. Instead, she disappeared toward the kitchen. Sun Tzu jumped off of me and followed her with his tail snapping back and forth, visions of dropped tidbits no doubt dancing in his head. Sitting up, I tried to stretch the ache from my joints and the fatigue from my muscles. "Hey, Dad," Kyle chirped from the table, his mouth half full of cereal and a broad grin on his face. "Hey, Mr. Patterson," Ben chimed. "Morning, fellas," I said, yawning. "Sit," Kristen ordered, bringing me a bowl of oatmeal and a plate covered with eggs, bacon, and toast. "Smells good," I said, sliding dutifully into the chair at the head of the table. "Eat up," she said, smiling as she slid the food in front of me. She went back and poured a cup of coffee, then placed that too, in front of me. "You didn't have to do this," I said, starting in on the toast and eggs, "but I'm glad you did." "Thanks." "You're welcome," Kristen said, sitting at the other end of the table and sipping her coffee. I ate my breakfast, polishing it off in record time, while Ben and Kyle chattered away about school and classmates and video games. Sunny darted around the table, yipping the whole time, waiting and praying for someone to drop something his way. Kristen sipped her coffee and took it all in with an easy smile on her face. It was like a family, I realized. A lot like what Whitney, Kyle, and I had once had, just with a dog and another boy at the table. It was nice. "So what are you going to do today?" Kristen asked as I stood and took my dirty dishes to the dishwasher. "Just bum around, I suppose," I said, my chest tightening. I was surprised the police hadn't already appeared and dragged me away in handcuffs. "Hang around the house and get some paperwork done. Get my class notes in order for next week." "I was thinking," Kristen started. "We want to order pizza and watch movies real late," Kyle interjected. I looked at him. "We?" "Me and Ben." I turned to Kristen. "Thoughts?" She shook her head. "If you've got other plans or want to do something else." "Movies and pizza sound great to me. What about you?" Her smile could have lit a city. "Sounds great to me, too." Then it's settled, taking the boys' dishes and putting them, too, into the dishwasher. Might as well plan on a slumber party, I guess. I won't say the look Kristen shot me was excited, but I can confirm that it made me remember my dream like the night before. I will also confirm that I would soon need a cold shower. "I'll take them to school with me," Kristen said, putting her coffee cup into the dishwasher before turning to me. "You get some rest. You're gonna need it." She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, then blew a light breeze into my ear. I wanted to jump her then and there, but the boys ran out with book bags in hand and they were all gone before I could act. I was dozing on the couch when the doorbell rang. My eyes flew open and turned to the clock. Just after 10. I approached the door like a condemned man walking to the gallows. "Professor Patterson," Gavers said when I opened the door. Without a word, I stepped back and motioned him and Sergeant Adams inside. "You got any weapons here?" Gavers asked once they were inside. I nodded. "Gun safe in the basement." He swept his arm. "Lead the way." I looked at him, unable to read his expression. Adams was likewise a blank page. I turned and led them to the basement, flipping on the lights when we got there. "Cool," I heard Gavers say as we wound our way between the battle scenes toward the corner of the long room. "Whatever," Adams mumbled, bored with my hobby. I spun the combination on the gun safe, then pulled it open and stood back. Adams leaned in, then turned over her shoulder and said, "They're not here." "Good," he shouted back, kneeling down and taking a close look at the tunnels filled with men on the AITA diorama. "Crazy shits," he said, then looked at me and smiled. "That must have been one rotten war, huh?" I nodded, wondering what they were setting me up for. I heard Adams whistle long and low, and I turned. She had a small wooden box open in her hand, her eyes looking from me back to the metals inside. "Suppose this explains it," she said to Gavers, who had by now moved on to study the Carthaginian tactics at Kenny. His eyes turned to her, narrowed, and he walked toward us. Taking the box, he looked inside and then at me. "Where's the citation?" I frowned. Besides my fellow soldiers, Whitney was the only one who'd ever seen it, the only one who knew what happened that day. His eyes told me I'd better show him. With a resigned shrug, I reached between them and back into the gun safe, withdrawing the folder containing the citation. Without a word, I handed it to him. Gavers ran his fingers over the cheap plastic folder, then flipped it open and read aloud. "Department of the Army. This is to certify that the Secretary of Defense has awarded the Silver Star to First Lieutenant Lucas M. Patterson, United States Army," Gavers said. First Lieutenant Lucas M. Patterson conducted himself with valor in the face of the enemy on February 24, 1991. While serving as a platoon leader for the 3rd Squadron, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, 7 Corps, 1st Lieutenant Patterson was part of the spearhead element invading Iraq. Shortly after crossing the border into Iraq, the lead elements were targeted with small arms fire and Gavers read the rest of the citation to himself, then he went back and read it again. Once finished, he handed the citation to Adams and fixed me with a stare. My eyes darted from him to Adams, who was now reading the citation, her eyes growing wider as she read. "You held off almost 200 men," Adams interrupted, "for a half hour, with only 2 other guys to help, and killed at least 29 enemy soldiers in the engagement, all with bullets and shrapnel in our legs and hips and belly," Gavers finished. "You some kind of goddamn Superman or Rambo or something?" Adams asked. "I'm a history professor," I said. They both continued staring at me. I said nothing in response. Reaching over, I took the citation from Adams and tossed it back into the gun safe atop the box of medals. Adams now looked at me with awe all over her features. Gavers, on the other hand, just gave an easy smile. He'd been there, I realized. In the Gulf War. He was about the right age, and he had the military bearing that never really goes away. They drill that shit into your soul during officers' candidate school. "You got any coffee?" he finally said. "Sure," I said, and led them back upstairs. I watched them at the table while I ground the beans and poured the water into the coffee maker. They never said a word, but they exchanged more than a few glances and raised eyebrows. For more than 5 long minutes, I stood at the counter watching them, wondering when the hammer was going to fall. Then, just as I reached for 3 mugs and the carafe of freshly brewed tar, I saw Gavers fix Adams with a stare. "Well, yeah," she said. I poured us all a cup of coffee, then sat at the table. "How's Whitney?" I asked. "A wreck," Gavers said, taking a sip of the coffee. "Dehydrated. Mostly. Still pretty much in shock, too. She'll come out of it," Adams said. "Few days of rest and relaxation and she'll be fine. Except for the nightmares," I muttered, more to myself than to them. "Yeah," Gavers said, staring into his cup of coffee. "They don't go away, do they?" I didn't respond. "The Labrazis are in custody now," Adams continued, "charged with kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment and a whole shitload of other things that'll keep them there forever." "Dunlop?" "Handcuffed to a bed just down the hall from Whitney," Gavers said. "Looks like he fell while trying to escape and hit the hell out of his head. A lot. Pretty bad concussion, but nothing really permanent." I nodded, trying to hide my relief that this was how they had decided to play it. "Strange thing about serious head injuries," Adams added, smiling. "Seems they wipe out short-term memory. The worse the head trauma, the longer the memory lapse." "He can't remember what he had for lunch yesterday," Gavers summed up. "Weird, huh?" "Weird," I agreed. "There was another guy there, too," Gavers said, now getting into his role and pretending he was telling all of this to a total stranger. "Really? Really?" Gavers echoed. "Manny Samuelson. Local meth maker, dealer, and all-around scumbag du jour, poor Manny. Dead." I asked, not really caring if he was. Adams started laughing. "Second a-hole. Gavers here shot him in the ass, right next to the other one already there." "Pretty messy," Gavers agreed, pinching his face in disgust. "And how did you two crack it?" I asked, relaxing totally and taking a sip of my coffee. "Just solid police work," Gavers explained. "Following up the leads," Adams added. I smiled from ear to ear. "Well done. Really, just well done." "Thanks," Gavers chuckled. "Tell our bosses that," Adams groused. "Still," Gavers said, "I'd just love to know why Dunlop decided to drive out there after sundown. I mean, if he hadn't done that, we'd have never found her. Poor Sergeant Adams would have just spent all night alone in her car down the block." I shrugged. "Maybe he needed to make sure nothing was wrong." Gavers raised his eyebrows. "Maybe," I continued, "he got a phone call that scared him. Maybe told him the cops were onto him and had wiretapped all of his phones. Something like that." Gavers nodded, his eyes narrowing as he did so. "Wonder who did that? I mean, pretty risky. A lot could have gone wrong." I returned his stare, agreeing with his assessment and overjoyed that nothing had gone wrong. My guess would be that the longer she was missing, the more likely she was dead. Whoever did it probably wanted to get shit rolling before they killed her. We were silent for a moment, all of us sipping our coffee. "I wonder something, though," I said. "Oh," Gavers responded. "Why was she still alive? I mean, why didn't they just kill her immediately?" Adams answered. "Dunlop remembered all of that. They were going to make her leave a message sometime next week. Like Wednesday or Thursday. A message saying she was now convinced the whole thing was a setup, the whole case against the Labrazis, and she'd taken off because she didn't want to have anything else to do with it. Sounds a bit far-fetched to me, I said. Gavers shrugged. They were screwed and they knew it. He'd cozied up to Whitney a long time ago, trying to get information from her about the case. He wouldn't tell us how cozy, but we can fill in the blanks. Either way, that didn't really work so well. Then, once the trial got going, she was bending over backward from opening statements to hammer them. They figured their best shot was a mistrial. Once the jury is seated, if the mistrial is intentionally caused by the prosecution, jeopardy attaches, and they can't be tried again. The whole thing goes away. Ballsy, I said. We finished our coffee in silence. Well, screw it, Adams said, pushing back from the table. Just wanted to let you know your boy's mom was okay and all. Thanks, I said, standing along with them. It's been a pleasure, Gavers said at the door, turning and shaking my hand with a firm grip. The pleasure's been all mine, I can assure you. He smiled, then turned and walked toward his car. You ever wanna, talk or something, give me a call, okay? Sergeant Adams said, pressing her card into my hand and lingering over the handshake just a moment longer than was proper. Thanks. Let's go, Sergeant, Gavers called out before sliding behind the steering wheel of the car in the driveway. She gave a quick smile, then turned and walked to the car. Give me a break, okay? She had her own handcuffs. On the following Monday morning, I was called into Professor Whitman's office. Your, former wife is doing well, I take it? I nodded. She'll be fine. She got out of the hospital yesterday. Good, he nodded. Then he stared off to his right, out the window at students shuffling to and fro under the autumn sun. I'm going to miss it, he said. Miss what, Dean Whitman? Sorry, but I wasn't just pandering. Even the president of Chadwick never called Whitman by his first name. He'd been around too long and done too much for the institution to not be given his due. He turned back and faced me, a peaceful smile on his lips. I'm retiring at the semester break, Luke. Sure, I'd been expecting this. It still hit me in the chest, though. You're doing okay, right? He nodded. I figure I've got another 5 or 6 years left, and I want to spend those years pulling together all of my notes and theories and writings gathered over the years. My magnum opus, so to speak. I remained silent, and after a moment he continued. I'll be on staff still, of course. Emeritus status. That'll entitle me to a research assistant to help, but I'm giving up my teaching duties and my position as dean of the department. But you can still... No, he said, his voice softening. It needs to be someone who teaches, a scholar and a teacher both. And that's you, Luke. If you want it, that is. I sat back. It would come with more responsibility, of course, and more pay too. But I'd have one less class to teach to make up for the extra administrative duties I'd be assuming. I think, you need to. You ever know something was coming, but still weren't prepared when it came? That's how I was. You'll do just fine, he said, his smile calming me. I smiled, leaving his office, completely at peace for the first time in months. My life seemed to be coming around. I believed I could be happy again. It was late October before Kristen again joined me in harmonious passion. We had spent the intervening month getting to know each other better, and friendship quickly blossomed to love. On Thanksgiving weekend, she and Ben moved in with Kyle, Sun Tzu, and me. Most of December was spent Christmas shopping. We were walking down the crowded mall when a voice froze us. Professor, Heather Farley was calling, shouldering her way through the throng of shoppers, pulling Randy along behind her. Merry Christmas, I said, smiling. Merry Christmas, they both said in unison, her voice all chipper and Randy's a drone. I introduced Kristen, and another round of holiday wishes followed. So, I said, wanting to get my shopping finished, you two sticking around here for the holidays? Heather smiled at me, then turned to Randy, leaned in, and kissed him. Yeah, he lives too far away for us to be together if we go home. We decided to just stay here. Randy's bashful smile told me he was embarrassed that the riches Santa would soon be bestowing upon him. Strangely, Kristen's face was, if anything, even more adoring as she smiled at his blush. Good, I said, interrupting their thoughts. Since neither of you is apparently all that busy, I've got some more things you need to get for me. You're kidding, Randy said. Not a chance, Heather agreed. I shrugged. If you change your mind. They got away from us before I could try to foist more work on their holiday break. She has a crush on you, Kristen said, watching them walk away. I chuckled. Looks more to me like they're in love with each other, which I'd have never seen coming, by the way. Kristen elbowed me. Men can be so blind sometimes. I turned, leaned in, and pecked her on the cheek. Blinded to all but you, babe. She made a gagging gesture with her fingers in her throat. I only laughed. All but me, Kristen said, seeing my sneak peek. Whitney phoned 3 days before Christmas. We'd barely spoken since she'd gotten out of the hospital. She'd been tongue-tied every time I'd seen her, which was usually at the beginning and end of her visitation periods with Kyle. Every time she looked at me, she got a haunted look about her face. The haunted look deepened when Kristen was around. I was thinking, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What wit? Maybe he should be with you on Christmas Day. I'll just take him for a while on Christmas Eve and get him back by 10 or so. Not a chance, I said. Ben's going to his dad's house, and Kyle's going with you. Kristen and I are going back to bed to catch up on all the sleep we're going to miss out on Christmas Eve. It's just that he's going to get bored spending all day and night with me, she said. Nonsense. He'll be bored here, too. He'll have his new presents to play with. He'll have them at your place, too. She said nothing to that. What's wrong, Whit? She mumbled something, and I asked her to repeat it. I guess I'm just trying to figure out a way to pay you back. For what? For everything, Luke. For taking care of Kyle. For saving me. Because I shit all over you. And you were still there for all of us. Saving you? I said. Karen Adams and Aaron Gavers came and saw me in the hospital. Before you and Kyle got there. I knew it was you in the mask. I mean, duh, right? When I brought this up, Karen told me the whole story. And they made a couple of things pretty clear. Number one, they'd have never been able to save me on their own. It was your plan that tipped their hand got Dunlop to go to where I was. 2, if I ever told a soul, you'd be in real danger. Not just the danger of prosecution, either. Danger of retaliation from the Labruzzies. Kyle too, I reminded her. Kyle could get caught in the crossfire. I know. So let's not talk about it anymore, okay? But you've got to let me show you I'm sorry. And thankful too. For all of it. I was silent. Please. You want to show me you're sorry? Maybe you've learned something? Fine. Then don't be late for your visitations. Don't blow them off. Spend as much time with Kyle as you can. He deserves a mother too. But Kristen is not his mother. You are. Always have been. Always will be. And when you're not there for him, he feels rejected. So you want to show me you're sorry and appreciative and all that shit I'm not asking you for? Fine. Don't leave me here to pick up the pieces because you've blown him off for visitation again. For any reason. From now on, Kyle needs to be first in your life, not your job. Fair enough? She paused for a moment, then whispered, Fair enough. Good, I said, calming down. Then have a Merry Christmas and don't be late. I heard her sniffle with tears. I'll be there. And Merry Christmas to you, too. And Kristen and Ben. We rang off. Christmas morning was like being back in the army. Reveille consisted of Ben and Kyle jumping on our bed at shortly after 4, all excited to go unwrap their presents from Santa. 20 minutes later, the sleep still in our eyes and mugs of coffee and hot cocoa all prepared, the boys tore into their presents. Kristen and I had agreed to spend the same on each boy, to shop for and buy all gifts together, and to make them all from Santa. No need to create jealousy, and we wanted them both to know that neither of us would play favorites with either of them. Such subtleties seemed lost, though, in the room full of opened gifts. What wasn't lost, however, was that not all presents between Kristen and me had been exchanged. Dad, Kyle said, hands on hips and eyebrows raised. When were you going to give Kristen her present? After you leave, I said. Kristen looked at me with raised eyebrows. Then a smile curled her lips. Strange, she said. I've got a present for you, too, that only gets opened when they're gone. Really? I said. Her look told me she was serious, and that I'd really, really like it. Whitney and Tyler appeared at the same time to pick up Kyle and Ben, respectively. So you're Whitney? Tyler said, shaking her hand after wishing her a Merry Christmas. The prosecutor who gave us all a big scare a while ago? She looked at the floor, then nodded. Well, I'm glad you're safe, he said, then paused, furrowed his brow, and looked at her strangely. Strange coincidence. My first book was about something like that. About an ex-wife who disappears without a trace. But in that one, the husband ran off and saved her. Whitney's head shot up and met his eyes. Then her face softened, and she said, I guess there just wasn't enough time for Luke to get in on the action. He laughed. Guess not. Still, I'm glad you're okay. Whitney turned to me with a soft look. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a look she'd not bestowed upon me since well before Charles Lawton Dunlop had appeared on the scene. I felt a pang in my heart for what had transpired between us. But then Kristen placed her hand on my forearm, and the regret was replaced with calm satisfaction at where I'd landed in life. "So who goes first here?" I asked Kristen once the boys had left. "I will," she said. "Give me 5 minutes, then come into the bedroom." The flash in her eyes told me 5 minutes on the dot. Not a second sooner or a second later. Eyes on the seconds hand of my watch. I opened the door at 5 minutes on the dot. The sight before me took my breath away as all of the blood in my body raced to my body. "I'm not going to lie to you," Kristen said. "Since my second divorce, I haven't been totally celibate. Pretty damned close, though, and I needed some help to get me through a lot of lonely nights." I tore the paper off and opened the box, looking inside with wonder. She smiled. "When we moved in a month ago, I hid this from you. In the attic. I guess I was, I don't know, ashamed or something, but the past month, hell, the past 4 months have been the happiest I've had in a long time. And I decided I didn't want to hide anything from you." Excited grin was spreading across my face. "So I didn't really buy you a present," she continued. "Not with money anyway. Instead, I thought I'd give you, I don't know, my total trust, access to all of my secrets, let you know that I'm not hiding anything from you, and that I never will." I looked into the box, then back to her. While satisfying, our lovemaking to date had also been conventional. My mind now whirled, though, at the various possibilities contained in the gift box before me. I reached into the box and pulled out a toy. "And what exactly do you want me to do with these things?" "Anything," she said breathlessly, her eyes closing. "Anything you want." "Really?" I said. I leaned in and kissed her, and she kissed me back. Once we were done with our exercise, we collapsed together onto the bed. I chuckled. It was time well spent. I awoke to Kristen kissing me and said, "So where's my present?" I opened my eyes, woke up, and went to the top shelf of my closet. Retrieving the small box, I turned and held it up to Kristen. She saw it, and her eyes immediately glistened with tears as her mouth turned to a sad smile. "Please tell me it's not." I hesitated, then handed it to her. With trembling fingers, she began opening the small box. Once it was unwrapped, she opened it and looked at the ring within. "I want to get married," I said, my eyes on her the whole time. "You're my best friend. You've been there for me through the worst of times, and now I want you to be with me for the best of times." She looked at me, then back to the ring. "But my past," she said. "I don't care. It's past." The tears really started flowing at that. "I don't want to hurt you, Luke. I'm damaged goods." I cupped her chin and turned her head to face me. "You made some mistakes," I said. "Sure, they were major mistakes, and they were probably mostly your fault. But that was then. Years ago. You're not that person anymore. But what if I am?" I shook my head. "People learn from their mistakes. I believe that. I really do. And you've learned. You'll never do it again. But how can you know?" "I just know." She looked at the ring, then at me, then back at the ring. I waited for her, tensing up, my chest ready to explode. Imperceptibly at first, then more vigorously, she started nodding her head, and crying, and laughing too. "I never want to lose you." I hugged her to me. "And I never want to lose you." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.